Time now to take the discussion forward with Carlos Mira. He's head of agri-commodity market research at Rabobank. Carlos, hi, welcome. And let's talk about coffee first. And that's the second most had beverage after water, nearly 2.5, 2.8 billion cups every day across the world. And we've seen the prices quite volatile in 2024. 25 is no different. How do you look at the prices currently, where we have seen a bit of a profit taking more for Robusta rather than Arabica?
Yeah, we certainly came off the peaks that we saw earlier this year. Certainly, of course, earlier this year we had historical high prices. And that was a combination of factors, right? The main concern was the lower Arabica crop in Brazil. We are looking at a crop that will be 5 million bags lower than the year before. Our expectation is 38, 39 million bags of Arabica. That's down from 44 million bags a year ago, which was already a low crop. So this is the fifth consecutive disappointing crop out of Brazil. But on top of that, we have a number of other factors in the market. We had massive delays in the shipping, disruptions, lack of availability of containers. Now, with the trade wars, since January, there was an expectation in the market, in the shipping market, that there was going to be increasing availability of containers as the world will be facing less global trade. This is good for moving coffee around. However, in the last few days, the prices for containers has been going up again because there are a lot of empty containers, but not in places where they are needed. And companies are thinking about shipping for Christmas, and they need to move those containers. So prices have been going up. The expectation for less global growth is still there. It should still benefit coffee shipments, but it's not in the spot market today, just yet. It's something, an alleviation that will be coming in the future. And on top of that, there were a number of other issues pushing higher coffee prices higher. One is the tariff in the US that created a rush to import coffee into the US. And we have seen also a similar rush to import into the EU ahead of the original implementation deadline of the EU deforestation regulation that was last December. Now, all those factors combine to push prices very, very high. We are seeing a retracement from those levels. A couple of reasons for that. One is that even though the Arabica crop in Brazil is not very good, the Robusta crop is at a record level. We are looking at around 25, 26 million bags of Robusta, quite a significant increase on previous years. And also the Vietnamese Robusta crop is developing more or less normally. So the weather has been cooler, it has been rainier than last year. So we are expecting a recovery in the volumes of Robusta in the two largest Robusta producers in the world. That should bring prices of Robusta a little bit lower. Okay. We're also seeing more coffee turning up at the exchange to be graded by the exchange. Yeah. There's a very strong inverse correlation between the certified stocks, exchange certified stocks, and prices. So that also should bring some relief to the market. And the final thing pushing prices lower is that demand is not doing very good. Oh. And there are a number of data points that we can look at. All right. So, for example, in Brazil, which is the second largest consumer, if we don't take the EU market as one market, we have then the US, and then Brazil not very far off from the US market in terms of volumes consumed. And the Association of Brazilian Roasters announced that in April, sales were 16% lower than a year ago. That's quite a significant amount in such a large market. Now, I think it's probably more...
Carlos, I would say the positive, though, is that the prices are coming off. I mean, that is a good news for consumers, isn't it, Nigel?
Yeah, that's right. Carlos, give us a couple of numbers then. You know, pricing as of now, as you said, the various factors at play could pull down the prices a little bit. So what is the broad range we should work with?
I think the trend is likely to continue to be lower. I think we might see something around 310 by the end of the year. So it's still quite a significant drop from current levels, more than 10%. However, we are still in an environment of low inventories. I think it's going to be quite choppy from here. So downward trend, but there's still a lot of choppiness in the market.
That's about coffee, but I want to move to cocoa as well. And Carlos, since you mentioned Christmas and the kind of demand that we will start looking ahead of that, we've seen cocoa prices also gain very strongly. We hit all-time highs in the last year, but since then there is some crop that has started coming in. There also has been some demand destruction because of those very high prices. Where would you look at the prices now by the end of this year?
It's very difficult to say because demand destruction in cocoa has not been as much as expected.
Okay.
It has been there, certainly, but not as much as expected. So we also expect a downward trend in cocoa prices, but it's very hard for me to give a number at this point. The crops have improved versus a year ago, but not significantly. What we do see, however, in cocoa, a lot of projects, especially in Latin America, to grow very, very significant areas with cocoa trees. So suddenly we have to expect a downward trend, but it's very hard whether cocoa will be at 7,000 by the end of the year or 8,000. But in principle, I will expect lower prices than today.
Carlos, coming on sugar as well, because the raws are trading at a 4-year lows and the Indian prices have continued to decline as well. It's expected to be a very good crop in the next season from Brazil, from India, Thailand, the major producers.
Yeah, that's right. We're expecting relatively good crops overall. In Brazil, the amount of sugarcane might be a little bit lower than last year, but the conversion should favor more sugar in detriment of ethanol because ethanol prices are quite depressed. So we have seen that driving sugar prices lower. My personal expectation is that the down move has been a little bit exacerbated. If we look at the last spike in 2023, there was quite a significant increase in prices that has not resulted in major investments in the sugar sector. I would say the sugar sector is a little bit unloved. And if we see any uptick in demand, maybe because China starts importing a little bit more sugar, now that they have been controlling the imports of sugar syrup, they might import some raws. That could very easily support the market.
All right, Carlos, what about the global demand-supply dynamics for sugar? How is that placed currently, and how is it likely to pan out?
Well, as you mentioned, we have relatively good production in Thailand. I don't think it's excellent. We have seen a limited increase in production in the last harvest. That disappointed to a great extent. We were expecting a little bit more. This coming season, we might see more or less similar levels or even a bit more. India, as you know, always has a relatively large margin of error. There's an expectation that India will increase production significantly in the coming season. But previous expectations on the Indian crop has always been attached to a relatively large margin of error. I think the government might be very conservative, allowing exports because of what happened earlier this year, where they allowed 1 million tons of export quota, and that could not be filled because the harvest disappointed.
Oh, well.
And then in Brazil, we are only expecting a little bit more sugar production. So I think it's going to be a relatively neutral balance sheet globally.
Absolutely. A final question then, and Carlos, have the tariffs impacted a lot? Because as you mentioned, US has shipped in a lot of commodities ahead of those tariffs, and we didn't know what would impact how much. Is the tariffs really impacting the markets even now?
Oh, yeah. I think on some commodities, like for example, coffee and probably cocoa as well, the threat of even higher tariffs is still there. Right, like for example, Vietnam, Indonesia, and I think Ghana as well, they were going to be affected with even higher tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs, that they could be reinstated in July, depending whether the US and those countries are right to negotiations. So we are seeing the US is still interested in absorbing a little bit more of these commodities, but also tariffs has a number of effects on commodities. One is the dollar weakness that, for example, if we look at the dollar, it's about 6% higher versus the end of 2024 versus other developed market currencies. Weak dollar, higher prices for dollar-denominated commodities. 101 here.
Yes.
So that's one impact. And the other impact is that the products that the US exports, which are grains and oilseeds, might tend to accumulate a little bit more in the US, and particularly soybeans. We don't see any sales of soybeans to China at the moment.
Oh, yes,
Even
there's
though
just so
tariffs,
much.
yeah.
As you mentioned, Carlos, there's just so much to watch out for, from dollar index to crop to tariffs to shipping to, and of course, the demand going forward as well. Well, that's about cocoa, coffee and sugar. And Nigel, we believe by the time it's Christmas, you'll be looking at lower prices from here. At least that's what Carlos from Rabobank is telling us. Carlos, thank you so much for joining in with your sense on all of those commodities there. And